The pounding rattled our front door like a battering ram. "Open the door, Mr. Walker. Your wife is under arrest." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. It was barely past sunrise, that soft hour when the world still feels half asleep. Sarah and I had been up maybe 20 minutes. I stood in the kitchen in my flannel robe and socks, staring toward the sound like it might be a mistake. The pounding came again. Harder, more aggressive. "Daniel Walker, step outside now." I glanced at Sarah. She had just come down the hallway, tying her dark hair back in a loose ponytail. One eyebrow arched in silent question. What now? I set my mug on the counter and moved toward the door. Through the side window, I caught flashes of dark blue uniforms. 4 men stood on my porch, broad-shouldered, military posture, tactical pants, black boots. The words stenciled across their backs in block white letters made me blink twice. HOA inspector. I squinted harder. The shirts looked cheap, shiny polyester, the kind you order from novelty uniform websites. But the effect was designed to intimidate. They stood in formation, 2 in front, 2 behind. Sunglasses hid their eyes despite the early hour. One man, the tallest, rested his hand on a holstered sidearm. Real or not, that gun was no joke. I cracked the door open, keeping the chain in place. "What's this about?" The tall man stepped forward, and my stomach dropped. Greg Morrison, my neighbor from across the street. The man who had helped me fix a leaking pipe when we first moved in. The guy who waved from his driveway every morning. The one who told everyone he was a cop and the neighborhood safety chair. He wore wraparound sunglasses even though the sun was barely up, a dark ball cap pulled low, and that smug half-smile I had grown to hate over the past year. "Step aside, sir," Greg said, voice dripping with false authority. "We have official reports of a code violation and a potential security breach. Your wife needs to come with us for questioning." I stared at him. "Questioning by the HOA?" Greg's smirk widened. "Neighborhood safety isn't a joke, Mr. Walker. Now get her out here. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Behind him, one of the so-called inspectors shifted uncomfortably. Another glance toward the street, maybe to see if anyone was watching. Down the block, I could see Mrs. Jenkins peeking through her curtains. Footsteps sounded behind me. Sarah stepped into view, calm as ever. She was wearing her dark gray workout jacket, the one with silver piping along the shoulders and fitted black pants. She walked to my side and looked out at Greg and his crew without a trace of fear. Greg straightened slightly. "Ma'am, you're coming with us now." Sarah's voice was steady, almost bored. "Do you have a warrant?" That one word seemed to throw him off balance for a fraction of a second. What? A search warrant? An arrest warrant? Any legal documentation whatsoever?" She tilted her head slightly, her tone polite but edged with steel. "Are you just out here playing dress-up this morning?" One of the inspectors coughed into his hand, clearly trying not to laugh. Another looked away, embarrassed. Greg's jaw tightened. "I don't need a piece of paper to keep this neighborhood safe," he said, his fingers brushing the butt of the pistol strapped to his belt. The holster looked professional, but the gun, I had seen enough real sidearms to know this one wasn't standard issue. Sarah didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on his. And in that moment, I saw the shift. Her posture straightened almost imperceptibly, her shoulders squared, and that calm expression, the one I had seen when she handled tense situations before, settled over her face. Greg had no idea he had just walked into a fight he couldn't win. "Daniel," Sarah said without looking at me, "why don't you call the sheriff's office and ask for the duty sergeant? Tell them we have 4 men impersonating officers on our front porch." Greg's lips curled into something halfway between a sneer and a snarl. "You're making a big mistake." Sarah's voice was cool. "No, Greg, the mistake is yours." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the low hum of the neighbor's air conditioning unit. Then, from somewhere down the street, came the faint click of a camera shutter. Someone was taking pictures. I had no idea then that this would be the first domino in a chain of events that would tear open the quiet life we had built and drag us both into something far bigger and far darker than a petty neighborhood dispute. 2 years earlier, the idea of a morning like that, men in fake uniforms pounding on our door, would have sounded absurd. Back then, Sarah and I were chasing something simple, peace and quiet. We had spent over a decade in San Diego proper. I was a civil engineer working long hours on big construction projects. Sarah, well, as far as anyone knew, she was a private security consultant. It was the kind of job description that satisfied curiosity without really answering anything. Our friends accepted it, our neighbors accepted it, and I never questioned it, at least not out loud. By our mid-40s, we were both worn down by the city. The noise, the traffic, the sense that we were constantly rushing from one thing to the next. Oakwood Heights seemed like a slice of what we had been missing. It was a planned community, just far enough from the city to feel separate, but close enough for me to commute without losing my mind. Tree-lined streets, tidy lawns, neighbors who waved from their porches, the kind of place where kids rode bikes until dusk and people left their front doors unlocked. We moved into a 2-story Craftsman at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The backyard had space for Sarah to set up her workout area, and the garage was big enough for my tools and workbench. The first few weeks felt like a second honeymoon. We hosted a small cookout, met the folks next door, and started our evening habit of walking the loop around the neighborhood just before sunset. That's when we met Greg Morrison. At the time, Greg was the picture of a friendly neighbor, tall, fit, mid to late 30s, with a clean-cut look and a ready smile. He told us he was both a local police officer and the neighborhood safety chair for the HOA. I didn't know if that was an official title, but he carried it like it was. In those early days, he was downright helpful. He came over our second week to help me fix a leaking water pipe in the garage. He complimented Sarah's backyard landscaping, said she had an eye for detail. He even invited us to a weekend barbecue where he introduced us to the rest of the block as the model couple. If Greg was in uniform, he would wave from his driveway as we passed on our walks. His presence and that black and white police cruiser, parked out front, seemed to give the street an extra layer of security. Neighbors talked about how lucky we were to have real law enforcement living among us. For a while, it was exactly what we wanted. Quiet, safe, predictable. The first sign of trouble came about a year in when we decided to replace our old wooden fence. The boards were warped and splintering, and frankly, it was an eyesore. We wanted something sturdier, something that would give Sarah more privacy for her work, which in my mind was still just security consulting. After checking the city ordinances, getting the property lines surveyed, and pulling all the necessary permits, we hired a contractor to put in a 6-foot wrought iron fence. We were well within our legal rights. City code allowed fences up to 8 feet. But the day the work started, Greg's behavior shifted. The waves stopped. The friendly conversations evaporated. He started appearing in his front yard, arms crossed, watching the crew work. His wife, Linda, began hurrying past us on her dog walks, avoiding eye contact. One evening, Greg came to our door. He was wearing a dark polo with a little badge-shaped patch on the chest. Not quite a police uniform, but close enough to signal authority. "Mike," he said. He always called me Mike for some reason. "Would you consider lowering that fence to 4 feet? It's blocking my view of the street from my kitchen window." I told him politely that we valued our privacy, especially since Sarah often worked from home and handled sensitive calls. "I understand," he said, his smile tightening. "But as a representative of the HOA, I think we should prioritize community harmony over individual preferences." It was the first time he had mentioned his HOA role like it carried real power. Up until then, I had assumed neighborhood safety chair meant planning the block party and maybe coordinating Halloween decorations. I remember closing the door after he left and feeling a small, uneasy knot in my stomach. At the time, I told myself it was nothing, just a neighbor with a strong opinion. But in hindsight, that was the moment the foundation started to crack. The first hint that beneath Greg's polished, helpful exterior was something harder, colder, and a whole lot more dangerous. It didn't take long for that uneasy knot in my stomach to prove itself. Less than a week after Greg's visit, I found an envelope in our mailbox that made my heart sink. Heavy paper, embossed law firm letterhead, the kind of thing you don't ignore. Inside was a formal notice. Per the bylaws of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association, the fence currently under construction at your property is in violation of community aesthetic standards. Failure to comply with HOA directives will result in fines of $500 per day, effective 30 days from the date of this notice. I read it twice, the legalese crawling like ants across my vision. Sarah was in the backyard when I showed it to her, mid-workout. She was wearing her usual dark athletic gear, hair pulled back, not even breathing hard after what looked like an intense set of burpees. Her eyes flicked over the page once, and she shook her head. "They can't do this," she said flatly. "We have the permits. We're in full compliance with the city." Her tone wasn't defensive. It was certain, like she already knew every rule, every angle. Still, I wasn't about to pick a fight with a law firm without checking the facts. I called the number printed at the bottom of the letter. The receptionist on the other end sounded puzzled. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have no record of your address, and we definitely didn't send any notice regarding a fence." "So, this is a forgery?" I asked. There was a pause. "If someone used our firm's name without authorization, that's a federal offense. Could you email me a copy of the letter?" By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. Partly from anger, partly from the cold realization that this wasn't just Greg being petty. This was calculated. That night at dinner, Sarah was quieter than usual. She stepped outside between bites to take phone calls, speaking in a low tone I couldn't quite catch. I asked if it was work-related. She gave a tight smile. "Just complicated," she said. "Nothing I can go into right now." Over the next week, the neighborhood's mood toward us began to shift. People who used to wave now crossed the street. Mrs. Patterson, from 2 doors down, who had once brought over homemade cookies, wouldn't meet my eyes. Then the notes started showing up, slipped under our windshield wipers, taped to the mailbox, tucked into our front door frame. They were polite, almost syrupy in tone. "We'd appreciate it if you'd work with the community for everyone's benefit." One was less polite. "Outsiders don't understand how good neighborhoods operate." Different handwriting each time, different paper, but the message was the same. Sarah noticed, of course she noticed everything. She started spending more time in the backyard on the phone, speaking in what I can only describe as tactical language. Not military jargon exactly, but precise, deliberate terms I had never heard her use before. I began seeing her differently, little things that had always been there, but I had never connected. How she would automatically choose the seat in a restaurant with a clear view of all the exits. How her movements were always economical, efficient. How she could size up a stranger in under 2 seconds. Greg, meanwhile, wasn't just content to spread rumors. He escalated. One Saturday afternoon, he organized what he called an emergency HOA meeting right on the sidewalk in front of our house. Nearly 20 neighbors showed up. Greg had a freshly printed sign propped against his folding chair. "Neighborhood Security Chairman." He stood up, gesturing toward our partially finished fence like it was a crime scene. "As you can see," he said loudly, "the Walker family has refused to comply with community standards. This isn't just about aesthetics. A fence this high could hide suspicious activities from street view." A few people nodded. Others glanced at each other uncertainly. Then he dropped the bomb. "I've conducted a background investigation on our new neighbors," he announced, looking straight at Sarah through the window. Sarah Walker works at a classified facility, and her exact job description is marked confidential. For all we know, we could be living next to people who pose a threat to national security. There was a murmur through the crowd. A few people stepped back. I stood at the window beside Sarah, my fists clenched. "He can't do that. He can't just—" "Oh, he can," she said quietly. "But he just made the biggest mistake of his life." Her voice was calm, but I could see the shift in her eyes. The same shift I would see again later on the morning, Greg showed up with his so-called HOA inspectors. Back then, though, I still didn't fully understand who I was married to, or how prepared she was for what was coming next. After that so-called emergency meeting, the temperature in Oakwood Heights changed fast. Not the weather, the atmosphere. When we first moved in, we couldn't walk the loop around the block without a half-dozen people waving or stopping to chat. Now conversations dried up mid-sentence when we approached. Eyes shifted away. Smiles thinned or disappeared entirely. I had grown up in small-town America. I knew what it looked like when gossip started to take root. And Greg wasn't planting seeds. He was broadcasting them with a megaphone. One afternoon, I caught him in his driveway talking to Mr. Callahan from 3 houses down. Their conversation stopped the moment I stepped outside to get the mail. Greg clapped Callahan on the shoulder and said something in a low voice. Callahan gave me a stiff nod, then walked away without another word. By the next week, the friendly notes began turning up again. Tucked under our windshield wipers, taped to the front door. We'd appreciate it if you worked with the community for everyone's benefit. Maybe lower the fence, and we can all get along. They were still written in different handwritings, which told me Greg had other people doing his dirty work. Sarah collected each note in a Ziploc bag and filed them away in her office. She didn't say much about them, just slid them in, labeled the bag, and put it in a box that was already half full. If the cold shoulders and anonymous notes were the soft tactics, the next phase was the hard push. On a Wednesday night around 9, I heard voices outside. Not the casual murmur of neighbors, but the purposeful tone of people on a mission. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw Greg talking to 2 men I didn't recognize. They were pointing toward our house, gesturing to the side yard, then nodding like they had just agreed on something. The following evening, as Sarah and I were cleaning up after dinner, there was a sharp knock at the door. Not pounding, not yet, but firm enough to raise my hackles. When I opened it, Greg was there in that same dark polo with the fake badge patch. His arms were crossed, his smile polite but paper thin. "Evening, Dan. Just wanted to remind you about Saturday morning's neighborhood safety check. HOA protocol. We'll be conducting inspections to make sure everyone's in compliance." I kept my hand on the door. "Is that an actual HOA policy or something you just made up?" Greg tilted his head. "I think you'll find it's in everyone's best interest to cooperate. Refusing inspection sends the wrong message." That night, Sarah and I sat in the living room, the TV on low. She was scrolling through something on her phone. Her brow furrowed in that way I had learned meant she was concentrating hard. "He's escalating," she said finally. I noticed. "Saturday is not a safety check. It's an intimidation play. He's going to show up with his little crew and try to manufacture some violation." I leaned forward. "So, what do we do?" She looked up from her phone, her eyes steady. "We let him come, but I'll be ready." 2 days later, the inspection came earlier than scheduled. It was 2 a.m. The power cut out first. Every light in the neighborhood blinked off, leaving the street in heavy, unnatural silence. Then came the crunch of boots on gravel, the low murmur of voices, and the sharp metallic click of a gate latch. When I peered through the curtains, my first thought was, SWAT team. 4 figures in tactical pants, boots, and navy blue shirts. But the words printed in big white letters across their backs made me blink twice. HOA Inspector. AAMA Way. They even had black ball caps, earpieces, and clipboards. As if the clipboards made them official. The effect might have been comical if it weren't for the handguns strapped to 2 of their hips, and the fact that they were on my property at 2 a.m. Greg led the pack, a flashlight in one hand, sweeping the beam over our windows. He stopped at the front porch and knocked hard. Sarah was already standing at the top of the stairs, fully dressed, her posture straight and alert. She didn't look surprised. "Stay here," she told me quietly. "I'll handle this." And the way she said it, it wasn't a request, it was an order. Greg's knock wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind meant to wake the dead. 3 sharp, booming raps that echoed through the darkened house. HOA inspection, he barked loud enough for half the block to hear. Open up! Sarah didn't rush. She walked to the front door like she was heading into a meeting she had already prepared for. Calm, measured steps. I followed a few paces behind, my pulse thudding in my ears. She flipped on the porch light. The sudden flood of light illuminated 4 men in those dark navy shirts with HOA inspector printed across their backs. 2 had clipboards tucked under their arms. 1 was holding a mag light like it was a baton. And Greg, standing front and center, had his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Sarah unlocked the deadbolt but didn't open the door all the way. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Greg's mouth curled into that practiced smirk. "We've had reports of unusual activity on your property. HOA protocol says we inspect immediately when there's a potential security issue." Sarah glanced at the letters on the back of their shirts, then back at Greg. "At 2 in the morning? Some things can't wait," he said. "Now we can do this quick and easy, or—" She cut him off. "Show me the paperwork." Greg blinked. "Paperwork? Yes. Whatever authorizes you to be on my property in the middle of the night. Search warrant, HOA inspection order, anything with an actual signature on it." One of the men behind Greg shifted his weight. Greg." "Quiet," Greg snapped over his shoulder. He looked back at Sarah. "I don't need to show you anything. I'm a law enforcement officer. This is my jurisdiction." Sarah tilted her head slightly, almost curious. "Your jurisdiction?" "That's right." He squared his shoulders, puffing up a little. "I've been keeping this neighborhood safe long before you moved in. And I don't need some." She opened the door wider, but only enough to step into the threshold. The porch light caught the glint of a small silver badge-shaped pin on her jacket collar. "You're on my property at 2 in the morning without a warrant, impersonating an officer, and armed. That's a long list of problems for you, Greg." His eyes flicked to the pin, then back to her face. "Don't try to intimidate me. I'm not trying," she said evenly. "This is me being polite." For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The men behind Greg were no longer standing quite so tall. One of them was staring at his shoes. Another glanced toward the street, like he was considering how fast he could walk away. Greg tried to push forward. "Step aside, Sarah. I need to make sure there's nothing dangerous here." Sarah's voice dropped into a tone I had only heard once or twice before. Low, calm, and unmistakably in control. "Greg, if you cross that threshold, you'll be trespassing, and you'll be leaving here in the back of a real police cruiser." His jaw clenched. I could see the calculation behind his eyes. Whether to call her bluff, whether to make a move. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Then Sarah spoke again, still calm. "Daniel, would you mind calling the sheriff's office and letting them know we have armed individuals impersonating inspectors at our front door? Ask for the duty sergeant." Greg's face flushed red under the porch light. "You're making a mistake, Sarah." "No," she said, her eyes locked on his. "The mistake is yours, and you're running out of time to walk away." For a moment, I thought he might actually do something stupid. His hand twitched near his holster. But the man with the flashlight stepped forward, murmured something to him, and Greg finally stepped back. "This isn't over," he said, pointing a finger at her like a threat. "Not by a long shot." She didn't flinch. "You're right. It's not over. But next time you show up here, you'd better have the real law behind you." They left without another word, the 4 of them melting into the darkness at the end of the street. The power flickered back on 5 minutes later. I closed the door, locked it, and turned to Sarah. She was still standing there, watching through the window until they were gone. "Who exactly are you?" I asked. She didn't answer. Not yet. But I knew that answer was coming, and when it did, nothing about our quiet suburban life would look the same. The house was quiet again, but not in the comfortable way it used to be. The kind of quiet we had now was heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening. Sarah stood at the front window a little longer, eyes fixed on the street. I could still see the faint glow of a flashlight in the distance as Greg and his crew disappeared between the houses. Finally, she turned and walked toward the kitchen. "We should talk." I followed her in, my mind still playing back every detail of the last 10 minutes. The fake uniforms, the guns. Greg's smug, self-satisfied expression. "Sarah, what the hell was that?" I asked, maybe louder than I meant to. She didn't snap back. She set a kettle on the stove, filled it with water, and turned on the burner. It hissed to life. Only then did she speak. "You've been asking yourself questions about me for a while now, haven't you?" It caught me off guard. "What does that have to do with Greg showing up here in the middle of the night?" "Everything," she said simply. The kettle began its low rumble, steam curling upward. She stood across from me, her hands flat on the counter, and looked me dead in the eye. "My name is Sarah Walker. I'm the elected sheriff of this county." I stared at her. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. "Sheriff," I repeated, as if maybe I had misheard her. "Yes. 15 years in law enforcement, 10 of those in the sheriff's office, elected last year." She paused, letting it sink in. "I didn't tell you because I wanted us to have a normal life here. But after tonight, normal is gone." The kettle started to whistle softly. I barely noticed. "I thought you were in private security," I said, still trying to wrap my head around it. "That's what I let people think," she said. "When you hold this position, you make enemies. Not just the kind you can see, but people with real resources and real grudges. Sometimes it's safer, for you, for me, if they don't know where I live." I leaned back against the wall, feeling the weight of her words. "So Greg?" "Greg is a dangerous man," she cut in. "He's not just a nosy neighbor with a fake badge. He's impersonating law enforcement, and that's a felony. The stunt tonight? Armed trespass. If I had wanted to, I could have had all 4 of them face down on the lawn in zip ties before the power came back on." She said it matter-of-factly, not as a boast. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "Because I wanted to see what he'd do next. Now I know he's willing to escalate. And that means he'll make a mistake. One I can use." She poured hot water into 2 mugs, slid one toward me, then reached into her jacket pocket. From it, she pulled a small digital recorder. "I had this running the whole time," she said. "Every word he said tonight is on here." It hit me then. She had been planning for this, or at least prepared for it, long before Greg showed up. "What's his deal, Sarah? What's he really after?" She leaned back, mug in hand. "I don't know yet. But people like him don't pull stunts like this just because they don't like a fence. There's something bigger in play." And now she gave a small, dangerous smile. Now he's my case. For the first time all night, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear. It was the realization that the man trying to intimidate us had no idea who he had chosen to mess with. Sarah took a sip of tea, then set the mug down. "Tomorrow I start digging. Greg Morrison's about to wish he'd never heard my name." Sarah didn't waste a second the next morning. By the time I came downstairs, she was already at the dining room table with her laptop open, a notepad beside it, and that same look she used to get when she was planning a major operation. Her coffee sat untouched. She was too focused to drink it. "Morning," I said, still groggy. "You start early." She glanced up. "Greg Morrison doesn't exist. Not here. Not in the county's personnel records. Not in the states." That woke me up faster than caffeine. "What do you mean he doesn't exist?" "I mean, he's not a sworn officer anywhere in California. He's not even a registered security guard here." She tapped the laptop screen where a state licensing database showed a blank search result. I moved closer. "So, who is he?" "That's what I'm finding out." Sarah pulled up another window, a law enforcement-only database she had access to as sheriff. We run background checks on new hires. I'm running one on him now. The tricky part is figuring out his real name. It didn't take her long. A quick search on property records revealed the deed for Greg's house was in the name of Gregory Mitchell, not Morrison. When she entered that into her system, the hits came fast. 3 prior arrests, she read aloud. 2 in Arizona for impersonating a police officer. 1 in Nevada for harassment. Fired from at least 3 private security companies for abuse of authority. Civil lawsuits in both states. Intimidation. false incident reports, stalking. I stared at the screen. And now he's here in our neighborhood. She nodded slowly. He's been moving state to state for years. Starts out friendly, builds trust, then uses that trust to gain influence. In some cases, he's taken over the HOA entirely. My stomach sank. This isn't about the fence. No, she said, her voice hardening. This is about control, and my guess, money. She switched to another tab, pulling up a database of corporate filings. He's connected to at least 2 shell companies registered in Nevada. Both list the same mailing address as a man named Victor Hale. Who's that? I asked. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Real estate investor. Used to be under investigation for property scams involving military families. He'd identify homeowners under financial stress, push them to sell below market value, then flip the property for a profit. And you think Greg's working for him? I think Greg's doing the dirty work. Intimidation, manufacturing violations, turning neighbors against each other so Hale can swoop in and rescue people from their so-called problem homes. She leaned back in her chair, which means we're not just dealing with a fake cop. We're dealing with an organized scheme. I rubbed my temples. So what now? Now, she said. We gather evidence. Everything Greg does from here on out goes on record. She showed me a small black device, a professional-grade surveillance camera no bigger than a deck of cards. I'm installing 3 of these today. 2 outside, 1 inside near the front door. They're motion-activated, night vision, audio-capable. You had these lying around? I asked. She gave me a look that said you already know the answer. By mid-afternoon, the cameras were in place. One was cleverly tucked into the branches of our front yard maple tree, aimed at the street. Another was hidden under the eaves above the garage. The third was inside, positioned to capture anyone standing at the door. That evening, Sarah sat me down. Here's the plan. We let Greg think he's winning. We don't react to the little stunts, but when he overreaches, and he will, we'll have him on tape. Her voice was calm, but there was something else under it. Determination, and maybe just a hint of anticipation. I knew then that Greg Mitchell, or Morrison, or whatever he wanted to call himself, had picked the wrong house to mess with, and I had a feeling it wouldn't be long before he found that out the hard way. Sarah always said that people like Greg can't resist 2 things, attention and opportunity. All you have to do is give them just enough of both, and they'll show you exactly who they are. The morning after she uncovered his real name, she sat at the dining room table with her laptop and phone, building what she called the net. She started with the HOA's private group chat, the one Greg had pushed on every resident, claiming it was for security updates. Sarah rarely used it before, but now she posted a carefully crafted message. Heads up everyone, we've been asked to temporarily store some equipment for a county training exercise. Nothing to worry about, but the delivery truck may come late at night. Please don't be alarmed if you see activity in our driveway. No details, just enough to sound official. Then she waited. By the afternoon, the bait had been nibbled. Someone, almost certainly Greg, had screenshotted her message and forwarded it to at least 3 other neighbors. Within hours, Sarah's phone buzzed with an alert from the hidden camera above our garage. Greg, pacing on the sidewalk across the street, phone to his ear, eyes locked on our house. That night, Sarah took it a step further. Using her sheriff's office credentials, she created a mock training inventory list. Nothing sensitive, but enough jargon to sound real, and left it accidentally open on her laptop in clear view of the front window. "Isn't that a little theatrical?" I asked as she adjusted the blinds so the screen was visible from the street. "Exactly," she said with a small smile. "Theatrical works on people who need a story to justify their actions." It didn't take long. The next morning, the camera in the maple tree caught Greg standing on our lawn before sunrise, angling his phone through the window, snapping pictures of her laptop screen. Sarah downloaded the footage, labeled it, and filed it away. "Step 1 complete," she said. Step 2 came that evening. Sarah logged into a secure channel and called someone she introduced only as Rodriguez. I learned later he was a retired FBI agent she had worked with on joint operations. Your guy's definitely still active, Rodriguez said through the speaker. Name's Victor Hale. Been moving property through straw buyers for years. Mitchell, your neighbor, is one of his enforcers. Sarah's pen scratched across her notepad. You have enough to charge? Not yet. But if we can prove he's operating under false authority and using intimidation to force sales, we can bring federal charges. You get me the bridge between his